All right, thanks, everybody. This is a Prescott City Council study session. Today is Tuesday, July 26th, and we'll start it off with a roll call.
Mayor Good.
Present.
Councilman Moore.
Here.
Councilman Sischka.
Here.
Councilman Tenney.
Yes.
And I will notate when Mayor Pro Tem arrives, and the record will reflect that Councilman Montoya is absent from the meeting.
Very good. You want to just read the topic for me?
Presentation and discussion regarding abatement procedures for dilapidated and unsafe structures in the city of Prescott.
Give me 1 second. I'm kind of short. Really short. There we go. That'll work. Alrighty. You good to go?
Good to go.
Good to go. All right. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. My name is Ryan Green. I am the Chief Building Official for the City of Prescott. I've been requested to this council to talk about the abatement of dilapidated structures within our city. We're going to talk a little bit about systematic updates, policy changes, and recommendations to the building division's condemnation and remediation processes. I've been the building official here at Prescott for about a year. I've been in this industry for just shy of 8 years. I was in Georgia for a while and then down in Marana for a couple of years as well. So starting out, I want to talk a little bit about terminology and meanings. Before we get too deep into this, I want to speak directly to the condemned structure definition. I pulled this definition directly from Webster's Dictionary. And basically what it is a property or building local authorities have closed, seized, or placed restrictions on for various reasons, including public safety and public health. So there's a common misconception in the public that a condemned structure is a structure that needs to be removed. That's not necessarily true. A condemned structure is just a structure that's unsafe to occupy. There's a safety violation there of some sort that the building department feels it is unsafe for people to reside there. So when we condemn a structure, if it's vacant, we just post it. If it's not vacant, we do require that the owners leave until the safety violations are addressed. And we can condemn structures based off of two definitions that we have in our city code. One would be unsafe buildings. This really hits on the structural portions. I'm going to use an example throughout this presentation in regards to a second floor that has a beam going through it that is cracked and is sagging. It's a safety violation, and in this case, it would lead to a violation of some sort. But I'm going to use that example throughout this presentation. So that would be an example of an unsafe building. We have a structural problem. We feel that there could be a portion or all of the building that could fall. The other condemnable violation that we have is for an unsanitary condition. This could be for leaking sewage into the basement, or the basement is flooded, or there's been a illegal drug use in the home, and we have some contamination issues there as well. So those are basically the two premises that we operate off of when we're condemning a structure. The last definition I want to talk about is a public nuisance, and that is really the distinction where we start looking at possibly having to remove a structure. So a condemned structure is a violation that we have, some safety issues that we need to address, but it's not affecting the community at large. A public nuisance is when those violations or those safety hazards start affecting the neighboring community. For example, let's say we have a house that has been, partially renovated and that is open and that it's along an egress walkway. We need to have that boarded up so we don't have children or things of that nature inside walking around in an unsafe area. Or let's say we've had open police reports even after the building has been, condemned and nobody's living there. We're still having people breaking in. We're still having windows broken. The minute it starts affecting the community at large is when we have a serious issue. So those are some of the terminologies and meanings. So how do we assess?
I have a question, Ryan.
Yes, sir.
It seems like under these various conditions, the property owner has the potential for actually repairing, remediating, or restoring it to a occupiable status. Is that correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. I would say probably 85% of the code violations that we have or condemnable structures that we have here in town are remediated rather quickly. A case in point, for the example, you've got a beam that's sagging on the second floor and it's unsafe. You go in, you notify the owner, hey, we need to get this addressed quickly. 90% of the time, compliance happens rather quickly. When that option of, hey, we either fix this or you need to move out, repairs happen awfully quick. When we have an issue where an owner or a tenant doesn't want to respond or they don't want to repair, that's normally when we start falling into that public nuisance area of, hey, this is a safety violation and it's not being corrected. We need to address it.
Thank you.
So in assessing these buildings, we use what they call a damage assessment report form. One of the biggest reasons why we use this is actually a compatible form with FEMA. It's what FEMA uses. So if we ever have an event where there's a natural disaster here in Prescott, probably the most obvious would be a flood, like today, or a fire. After the first responders go in and do their job and do it well, like we know they can, there's a mess at the end. There's damage. There's buildings that have fallen down. So at that point, what the building department would be required to do, we would be required to do assessments on all of these structures. So when FEMA shows up for aid, they have a good case study of where did the damage happen the most, what is the extent of the damage. A lot of times, when FEMA comes in after a natural disaster, the building division hasn't done a good enough job of recording these things because, oh, natural disaster happened, FEMA's coming in. FEMA's going to save us all. And then FEMA gets here and goes, where are all your reports? Where's all your damage assessment? We can't help unless we know where it is. So that's one of the biggest reasons why we use this damage assessment form. And it actually parallels nicely with code violations as well. So after receiving a concern or a complaint regarding a potential unsafe or unsanitary condition, the building division visits the site to complete a damage assessment report. I read that bullet because I wanted us all to be aware that currently the city of Prescott is operating under a complaint-based driven enforcement system. We receive a complaint, we respond, we either find it founded or unfounded. Unfounded meaning there was no safety violation there, or a founded violation meaning there's some repairs that need to happen. And the report consists of three possible outcomes. Number one would be the structure is unsafe for occupancy. We need to remove the individuals from the home quickly and fastly because we feel like there's a safety hazard there. And at the end of the day, that's really what all of this process is wrapped around. We're protecting the health, safety, and welfare of our public. So we go into the house, the second story beam is sagging. Hey, we need to remove ourselves, and we need to either go get a licensed contractor, a licensed architect, a licensed engineer, whatever is specified that we feel as the building division needs to be done to bring that home back into a habitable state. The other option, and this is probably the most widely utilized one, is where we just condemn a portion of a building. A great example of this is decks. We have decks everywhere in Prescott, second, third, four-story decks. A lot of times the deck will dilapidate, but the home is okay. We'll show up and condemn the deck, tape it off with some yellow tape and let the homeowners know, hey, you need to stay off this deck until we get it repaired. That's probably the most common condemnable item we see in town. Is it's a portion, it's a shed, it's a deck, it's a back room that can be roped off from the rest of the residents and have that repair done without adversely having somebody have to leave their home, because that's never really what we want. Yes, Councilman.
Thank you. Just a question. If these inspections are done based on a concern or complaint, how do you know when somebody's deck is going bad? I mean, how do you know somebody's shed is? I mean, who's reporting these things?
We actually get a lot of complaints and concerns from our citizens. I would say probably on any given week we'll get 6 to 7 concerns. Most of the time, when the complaint stems is it's the deck is starting to fall down. There's boards falling off. It's clearly unsafe. And at that point, a citizen will call in and say, hey, I'm not really quite sure what's going on here. And a lot of times it doesn't even come in as a complaint. A lot of times a citizen or a person will call me and say, hey, my deck's real squeaky, it's kind of wobbly, do you think you can come out and take a look? And then at that point, those are my favorite because it's more of an educational standpoint than an enforcement standpoint. But that's typically how we receive our complaints and concerns. So in the results of a damage assessment report, we outline if a structure requires a permit to be obtained, licensed registrant or a contractor required, and if the structure needs to be boarded up until repaired. We have a lot of second homes here in Prescott, so a lot of times we'll receive a concern or a complaint over a second home that the homeowner might not necessarily know it's dilapidating. And we'll contact the owner and say, hey, your siding's fallen off, there's been a busted window, how would you like us to proceed? And most of the time they will board it up until they get a chance to repair it. And in the opinion of the building division, once you board up a structure like that, it's no longer a public nuisance for a short amount of time. I mean, if we say, hey, we need this repair either started or completed in 90 days, if they come out and board it up and we know nobody's going to be in there, we consider that a contained site. So that's kind of how we handle this. We'll post whether we want an unsafe condition exists, like what's shown on the slide, do not enter. We can give them the report to hand to their contractor, architect, saying, hey, this is what the building division is needing for us to be able to habitate this structure again. So our current code, there's quite a bit, but not a lot on the condemnation process here in City of Prescott. Items B and D are really just stemming on the fact of we do require that we have to give an owner notice, and we hold to this pretty true. We require that somebody responds back to us within 48 hours. We want to know that they're aware that there's a violation at a residence and that it needs to be addressed in some fashion. And then we can give 90-day increments. So most of the time we will really push that it's completed within 90 days. What we've been seeing in the last 6 or 7 months, material prices are high, material shortage, labor shortage. A lot of times 90 days just isn't enough to repair a dilapidated structure. But in that same breath, within that 90 days, we need to see substantial compliance from a residence. We need to see that building remediated to a point where we can see a clear movement forward, because we don't want these structures to just sit unrepaired for an extended period of time. So I want to really hit on items F and I of PPC section 341. And F basically touches on the fact that if an owner fails or neglects or refuses to comply with the stipulations highlighted in the violation notice or the damage assessment form, the city council can order the owner of the building to be prosecuted, and they may order the building official to proceed with the work specified in the notice. So, for example, the second story beam. We show up, post a damage assessment, hey, this isn't safe to be in here right now. It needs to be repaired. We need 90 days to see substantial compliance. At the end of that 90 days, nothing has happened. The building is not boarded up. We've reached out to the owner multiple times trying to see where they're at with the process. We can't get any response back from them. At that point, I would come before this council and say, hey, this is where we're at. What would be your suggestion with what we move forward? And you, as the council, can proceed with the work specified in the notice. So if the recommendation from the building division is to demolish the structure, that's where this decision would be made. And then a statement of the cost of such work shall be transmitted to the city council, who shall cause the same to be paid and levied as a special assessment against the property. So worst case scenario, we have to remove a building. We contract or have one of our groups remove the structure, and then we would place a lien on the property until it either sells or another decision is made. And then the last section here, PPC section 341I, is basically just hitting on what are the penalties. So if you are deemed guilty of a misdemeanor or a violation in this case, you will be deemed guilty of a separate offense for each day during any violation of any provisions of the city code. So that is a very common stipulation in all the jurisdictions I've worked in. That's how it's been set up. If you're deemed guilty of this violation, it's a $2,000 a day fine until the violation is addressed. So I'm going to click off of this fun slide and go to this. So what are we doing right now in the building division to update the abatement process? I would say first and foremost, code enforcement personnel is now under the direction of community development. That really aids us. It allows us to utilize them effectively in our investigations, in our cases, and it also empowers code enforcement to be able to do investigations in cases. Under the direct supervision of community development, they can also utilize my certifications as the building official to actually post buildings if they needed to, condemned building. Obviously, we work very closely together, but it's just a nice addition to the community development department that we have a few more people to be able to help us with this issue. We've moved to a more mobile and paperless tracking system. I can't claim, fame for that. COVID kind of did that to us, but it's really helped. A lot of times with these building code cases, they move very quickly, and there's a lot of decisions that are being made on the fly out in the field. An inspector sees a safety violation. Things need to start moving quickly, and having that mobile and paperless tracking system has really benefited in our enforcement tactics. And also, we've implemented a lot of cross-departmental enforcement. A lot of times, we're notified of a building violation through the PD. Maybe there was some sort of illegal narcotic use, and they had to go into the structure and notice that there was an issue, and we respond from that. A lot of times, it was a fire. We get a lot of concerns from the fire department. Hey, there was a fire last week. This building had a fire in the kitchen. Will you guys go out and take a look at it? And we also work closely with Public Works and Planning and Zoning. So we've kind of got the 4 departments there all working together to try to gain compliance. We're also actively pursuing complaints and recording both founded and unfounded violations. A lot of times if a violation is unfounded, it doesn't get recorded. And sometimes we have issues where maybe a neighbor isn't too pleased with what's going on next door. We show up for a site inspection and deem that there's no violation there. If we don't record that, a lot of times that complaint or concern will repeat itself 3 or 4 times. And then at that point, we have a frustrated, homeowner that's going, why are you continuing to come out here? We've already addressed this issue. So we're really trying hard to make sure that we record all those unfounded violations. And when we respond to a complaint, an inspector or myself or a code enforcement officer is not only investigating the specific site for safety hazards, but we're also kind of canvassing the whole block and the community as well. Just because a lot of times if you have a dilapidated structure in a community, oftentimes there's a few more, and we like to just canvass the whole area while we're out and really try to take that education factor to it instead of an enforcement factor of notifying owners, hey, maybe we need to start addressing some of these items that are going on with your residents before we end up into a violation case. So what are some of the barriers and obstacles that we're seeing right now? Number one, they're difficult to track. They're often abated over an extended period of time. We have multiple case violations that have been going on for 1 or 2 years, and the reason being is there is movement. It's just not all the way. It's just enough to keep the project going. Investigating officers and owners change hands quite a bit as well, which can also make these cases difficult to track. Also, owners can be unreachable. They might be incarcerated. It's very difficult to contact somebody at Florence. I've tried. And then also you can have owners that are notified of a violation for a second home or something like that, and they'll sell it rather quickly. And then the owner changes hands, and now we're trying to track down a new owner because everything's kind of just changed based on the violation. Boarding and securing of unsafe structures, this is probably the biggest one for me. A lot of times when we see these violations, it is a safety hazard. Even if it's not repaired today or tomorrow or next week, the site needs secured. What we don't need is, children going in there or somebody that doesn't quite know what's going on. We don't want somebody traipsing through an unsafe home. So we need to have them boarded up and secured quickly. And a lot of times that's hard to get compliance from an owner if they're out of state or things of that nature. So that can be difficult as well. And then the cases develop very quickly. So you show up, that second floor, beam is split, it's hanging. It's one of those, oh my gosh moments. As a building official, your spidey senses goes off, the hair on the back of your neck raises, you're concerned. Things need to move quickly, and a lot of times our process isn't quite quick enough to catch up with what's going on real time in the field. And then also our current code is vague in some cases. It doesn't clearly define a condemnation and the responsibilities of securing a structure, and it doesn't expand upon specific departmental processes and procedures. That's one of the difficult things we have as a building division is, well, I think that there's a safety violation, but there's not clear parameters at this time. So the house fire at Granite Creek, this is what really stemmed this presentation. And what did we learn? We learned that on a Tuesday morning, we all looked down into our beautiful Granite Creek, and there was a big black plume of smoke rising. It was a abandoned home that had been there for 3 years or longer. It had been there for longer. It had been condemned for 3 years. We knew about it. It had been boarded up multiple times, and it was repeatedly getting broken into. And eventually it caught on fire. Luckily, it was down in an area where we didn't lose any other structures. But if this would have been in the middle of a residential neighborhood, it may have been catastrophic. So that's what stemmed this conversation, and this is what we're trying to ameliorate, is to make sure this doesn't happen again. So what can we do, or better yet, what can this council do to aid the building division in our condemnation and violation process? And number one would be a hearing officer process. So with a hearing officer process, there is a separate entity that is pursuing these violations, and it's essentially a court. They're handled more efficiently and effectively. Things move quicker. It implements more enforcement and compliance tactics. It is you need to go in front of this, governing body, and we need to address this violation. It's no longer in the hands of the building division. It is in a court somewhere to address those violations. And it offers cross-jurisdictional continuity. Yavapai County currently operates under a hearing officer process, as well as Prescott Valley. So it wouldn't be something that would be new to this area. If I remember right, we in the city of Prescott also used to have a hearing officer process. So in our opinion, in the building division, this would really aid in quickly addressing these violations. And we've consulted with some experts that have been around this process, and you're looking at about 80 to 90% compliance, and 10 to 15% having to go to our city attorney and processing those violations that way.
Mr. Young, can you comment on that? I think there historically had been a hearing officer position in the city that then was eliminated. But it seems to me like this is a opportunity for a due process, for appeal of some sort, and for a particular individual that would be much more knowledgeable about the building codes to be able to make a determination for a property owner, and potentially grant exceptions or be able to make a determination that's a little more fair in some of the kind of very unique or emergency types of situations you were describing, Ryan, could be considered.
I agree, and we discussed it a little bit, but I think that the hearing officer process is important, and I think it's just much more effective. So right now, these cases will come into the city attorney's office, and then it starts a criminal case, and we don't control the judge, and the judge will oftentimes say, well, what have you done to work with the person, and slow down the process through the court. But this eliminates all of that kind of inefficiencies. Once it went through the hearing process, and then the 10 to 15% that didn't fix their issues came to our office for criminal prosecution, the judge would not be in a position to try and hold us up, because he will have seen what we've done up to that point. So I like the process. I've asked Matt in my office to resurrect the old documents and update them, and so we'll update them, and I think it'll be better for the city in general, and enforcement will be quicker and a little bit more flexible for those people who just are kind of lazy getting things fixed.
Ryan, can you give us an idea of maybe the scope and the frequency of such issues? How often would they likely to come forward, and how would we create such a position, and how would it be located within different departments?
You want to?
It's up to you, Mr. Young.
I guess you asked a couple of questions, but the toughest issue is deciding who the hearing officer will be.
Right.
And I think that is always part of the written process, and that's what, like I said, Matt's finding the old documents to see how we did in the past. But I think it's best when that's administrative. I would like to see, and this will take some investigation by us, but whether the Yavapai County hearing officer or Prescott Valley hearing officer or whoever's doing this has extra capacity, because it would make sense for the cross-jurisdictional continuity and the expertise that person would have. So we'd have to look at that. But that's the one question that kind of remains. I think it should be an administrative process rather than a political one, in order to keep those efficiencies we're talking about.
Yeah, I would offer that we probably ought to contact the other hearing officers just to find out what their scope of frequency in dealing with that, and if we can kind of replicate the design, then I think the larger community would know there is some consistency within these hearings.
Absolutely, and I can also reach out to the Yavapai County building official and Prescott Valley building official and see what their process is to get a case to the hearing officer. How is that laid out as well, so we can just add some more continuity between jurisdictions.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to state that we're not trying to be heavy-handed here. We realize that Prescott's old, has a lot of historic buildings and structures that could be considered dilapidated and run down, but to use a real estate term, that's considered charming. But I just think we need to get some teeth in our code to take care of property owners that abuse the situation, like with the Granite Creek fire. And just because it's abandoned doesn't mean that people aren't living there. And we were very lucky that there wasn't a loss of life and maybe a potential liability lawsuit, because we were aware that it was considered dangerous and attractive nuisance, and we didn't do anything about it. And I don't know who the owner is or what their situation is, but it's our job to take public safety seriously. And I'm all for tuning up this code, giving it some teeth, so that when we have a structure like that, we have a set time. And if the owner doesn't take care of the problem, then we'll take care of it for them and send them a bill and put a lien on the property, because we just can't let these abuses continue. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. So, with combination of the hearing officer process, another recommendation would be to adopt the International Property Maintenance Code. This is a national standard. It's an International Code Council adopted document. It addresses more violation types than just a condemnable structure. So instead of going through a crazy city code rewrite, we could adopt this code that really envelops everything property maintenance, from sanitary conditions to unsafe building conditions to structural conditions. It's a good code. It provides a more detailed guideline for what constitutes a condemnation ruling. It's consistent with the current building codes that we've adopted here for the city of Prescott. It references the IBC and the IRC, which is the International Building Code, and the National Residential Code, the codes we apply to new structures today. So it would fit in with the suite of codes we have rather nicely. And then also it allows inspectors and investigators to become International Property Maintenance Code certified, which obviously helps with the liability if we end up in a court or something. We have certified people in this document, and they're aware of what the national standard is.
Ryan, do you have experience with that in your current or past positions?
I am not currently certified in the IPMC. I carry 21 certifications. This is one that I've been needing to get.
Yeah, you need a round number like 22, huh?
Exactly. We utilized this code when I was working in Roswell, Georgia, and we also used it in Marana, Arizona. I'm a component of it. I like the code. It's a good code, and I always like using a national standard code opposed to, a city code that's written, just because it's easier from a liability standpoint of this is a national standard. This is where the rest of the country is operating as well. And it really does a good job over pursuing remediation over condemnation, which is kind of my concluding slide here is what can we do to prevent dilapidation in the city of Prescott, not dealing with the dilapidation that's here. How do we prevent it? Councilman Rusine, you mentioned that we have a very old jurisdiction, and we do, and it's not going to get younger. It's going to get older, and it's going to get older. So how can we combat that? Number one, we can seek to utilize the minor home repair program more frequently. A lot of times we have an issue with a dilapidated structure that it's not that the owner doesn't want to comply, it's that the owner doesn't have the financial means to pay for the repair. Now, in the minor home repair program, it's not something where we're going to be able to completely remediate a 2,200 square foot Victorian home. But the busted beam on the second floor, that $5,000 could go a long way for a family to get their house fixed and be able to continue to reside in it. We also need to provide more literature and home maintenance workshops for the general public. We provide a lot of workshops and luncheons and sit-ins for our construction industry, and we love them. But sometimes we need to jump over to the general public and educate them on how to prevent dilapidation in the home. Teach our constituents how to inspect their electrical panel to make sure it's safe, how to check the siding to make sure that it doesn't need repainted. Things of those natures can really help in preventing dilapidation and avoiding a safety hazard. We could also implement some annual inspections for the jurisdiction's larger industrial businesses and facilities. I know we've spoke a lot about residential construction, but we also have some code case open for commercial structures in town, and they can also be unsafe as well. We need to take a more proactive and educational approach to code enforcement. I'm a big proponent over education over enforcement. The message is received better that way. The word spreads faster that way of, look, the building division is just trying to educate on what we're doing out here and how we're fixing up our home. They're not out here trying to slap violation stickers on all the time. They're trying to help. And then in my concluding point, I'd like to say that we're always seeking to achieve remediation over condemnation if technically feasible. We have an old jurisdiction. We're known for our old structures. We want to keep them. And the whole point of this presentation is we're not out there trying to condemn structures. We're just trying to remediate them and make them safer for our public. We're concerned about the health, safety, and welfare of our constituents. So with that concludes my presentation. If you have any further questions.
Yeah, I agree with that approach. I think when we used it to clean up the Dexter neighborhoods, when we offered all those trash containers to allow people to bring whatever in their yard and help clean it up with virtually no cost involved. A lot of people took advantage of that, and then consequently the neighborhoods were in a lot better condition. And subsequently we saw some people who wanted to say, I think I'm willing to make an investment in this neighborhood and put in some small apartment buildings and things like that that not only helped the neighborhood itself, but helped with some of our challenges for low-cost workforce housing and things like that. So that almost all was generated through education and support rather than code enforcement and violations.
Absolutely.
Well, that's where we stand now. I think we would want to survey some of the other hearing officer programs in our surrounding community to try to adopt those in a similar way. I think we should also look into this international IPMC maintenance code to see if that's convenient to adopt and look into the certification requirements. I think having that as a standard for hearing officers or for us to proceed with this would really be a good way to protect the liability component of this. But we do need to know how much cost and time, et cetera, would be involved. So either we clarify some of the current city codes, which we might want to consider in advance of adopting the IPMC, because that I think needs to be as clear as possible, so that if we do get into more stringent enforcement, we have justification for taking those additional steps. And Mayor Pro Tem, you had a comment?
Oh, I just wanted to ask Ryan, did you say that the city had been dealing with, for 3 years, with the owner of the Granite Creek
We had
property?
been trying to contact the owner for 3 years. We could not find or get a response back from the owner. It was condemned prior to my tenure here at the city. So when I picked it up, I could not find the owner. There was notes in our records saying, owner unfound. So we were currently working through the process of trying to get the structure reboarded back up, because we had received notification from the police department that there was some activity continuing to happen at the structure.
So clearly, we need to get some teeth for the extreme abusers, so that we're not put in this situation again.
Agreed.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I think we were very lucky when that happened. I mean, I was in my office and looked out the window and saw this big black plume of smoke, and went down there as quickly as I could. And fortunately, we had the fire department and several trucks that were able to get water on that very rapidly, because otherwise, quite frankly, it could have expanded into that neighborhood. We could have lost several other homes. So I think we need to be a little more proactive here, quite more proactive, and rather than wait for a disaster to occur, try to be proactive on it, but in a reasonable way.
Absolutely. So, thank you so much for your time, Mayor and Council.
Okay.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you, Ryan. Do we have any public comment?
We do not, Mayor.
No. Any other concerns or conditions or comments or questions, et cetera? Then I think our study session here is adjourned. Thank you.